Hello, everybody. My name is Asher Rahman, and my final film project will be about gun control and why we should enforce it. So let's explain the controversy a little bit. It's a backstory. So it all started with the infamous shooting of the Columbine shooting. It happened at a high school in South Carolina called Columbine, and ever since then there's been a huge attention towards school shootings. And there's been very notable, especially the past 10 years, such as Sandy Hook and Parkland. Now, the way that the country's handled it may not be the most suitable, in my opinion. Now, each state has its own background checks and ownership process, which, you have to go through a process in order to own a gun, and each state has its own different one, and we'll explain that a little later. That being said, it is easier to attain firearms in some states over others, due to this, lack of background checks or just different processes in general. Both political parties are split on this issue, meaning, right-leaning or Republicans generally are about, giving the gun laws the way it is, or relaxing it even more, and usually left-leaning people or Democrats usually believe that we should have more gun control and enforce more of it, or at least be, more attentive to this stuff. And, and just the amount of school shootings, how notable they have been, it's almost numb to the average American, which is very, very sad. So let's talk about some numbers. So to picture in your head what's actually going on. So about 292,000 kids have been affected in school shootings since Columbine. Remember, Columbine was in 1999, so this is a lot of kids affected in the past 23 years. And in 2020 alone, there's about 417 shootings, and 2021 has recorded 600. And if you see the bottom right, it's kind of hard to see the figures, but each bar represents a decade, and they go up. And on the rightmost is the 2010s, which has 426 shootings. So in 2020, almost rivaled the amount of shootings that happened 10 years prior, and 2021 has surpassed it, unfortunately. According to the University of Chicago's SSA, more than 85 Americans die from gun violence daily. Annually, another 73,000 are wounded, and virtually millions are impacted. So if you want to do the math and have a rough estimation of how many people die every year, so do 85 times 365. That's over 31,000 people dying every year from this. And that puts in perspective how many people die in a year by guns. And there's various ways that can happen, but it's just sad. So background checks. As mentioned before, background checks are a way that, the government or government officials check people to own guns. And when you usually purchase a gun, there's usually a background check. And depending on what state you are, background checks are different. And it's a way that they profile that you're eligible to have a gun. Now, some type of background checks include comprehensive, where they look through all your records, public, criminal, court, to see if you're eligible. And they're eligible to get a gun, because people who are mentally unwell, or people who have a large criminal record, or maybe has a history, or has family that are not too well with guns, maybe they're not eligible to have guns. They're not responsible for them. And states that have them are generally more left-leaning Democratic states like Maryland and Pennsylvania. There's also a handgun license, where one must have a license to have a gun and needs to be renewed. Kind of think of it like a driver's license, but for guns. And needs to be renewed depending on what state you live in. It depends on the years. In Connecticut, it's 5, and it's an example has this. And there's some states, particularly a lot of red states or Republican states, that don't even have a background check. You just get a gun. And according to Johns Hopkins, there was a decrease of firearm homicide and suicide by the Connecticut law of just a license. And Missouri used to have that license, but since they repealed it, there's been a huge increase in homicide and suicide, even non-firearm homicide, which has shown how bad violence is, especially the past 2 years during the midst of the pandemic, where everything is just unstable for the common man. Violence has went up. So we have to understand the other side. What is a counter-argument to what I'm saying? And many of the other side's arguments are misunderstanding of gun statistics, which is pretty fair, because you have to understand what the statistics is actually representing. You can't just cherry-pick statistics and go along with that, because that's not a healthy way of viewing things. For example, the New York University's School of Law's director for the Center for Research in Crime and Justice. It says that gun violence has been down since the 1990s, despite increase in gun ownership. And he also alleges that, one can read that there's 30,000 people that have been killed by guns, but they'll never tell you that 20,000 people actually took their own lives. Another criminologist, Luigi Esposito, said that the U.S. cannot adopt the strict gun control that other countries have because of the Second Amendment and gun lobbyists. Now, there's obviously some issues. Sure, 30,000 people died, which, as mentioned earlier, that number is not incorrect. It is not incorrect. It's actually quite accurate. And the suicide part is also very accurate. However, that's still many people that are taking their own lives and killing other people. 10,000 people is nothing to scoff at. And neither should 20,000. That answer should be 0. Or should be kept to a minimum. That high, there's got to be some intention, especially suicide. And the Second Amendment, and this kind of ties to the first point, never said you couldn't have background checks. And if that was the case, then all states wouldn't have background checks. Why do some states do and some states don't? They don't. They all follow the Second Amendment regardless, or else the government wouldn't ever allow it, And also, with background checks, that's why background checks should be enforced. Just something as simple as a license or just checking through criminal records has shown, as shown before, that, it could decrease homicides and suicides. Since people are mentally ill, whether they want to kill themselves, other people, or potentially both, that's not good. And they kind of undermine how bad that is. So here's the conclusion, just to summarize the whole presentation. The rate of violence is high and needs to be aided, especially these past 2 years in the midst of the pandemic. It has shown a huge increase. We had a total of almost 1,000 shootings just in the past 2 years. It's really bad. And the past 2 years has been almost 3 times of what the past decade, what the 2010s were. And background checks are a good way to monitor gun control. It's not, maybe not the favorite way, but it's a good way to monitor gun control. Something as simple as a license, or something as simple as maintaining a gun, or background checks, checking someone mentally ill, is a good way to, siphon out some people that are not mentally well and not mentally capable of owning a gun. Even something as simple as a pistol. Because guns are very heavy objects and are, meant for murder or protection. Gun control affects people physically, but more mentally. Meaning that, look, there's a lot of people that die from gun control. Many are wounded, and, a lot of people die, more are wounded, and many, many more are affected emotionally. People who witness it, maybe part of the shooting that didn't get hurt, or, maybe have loved ones that have died or have gotten injured that has taken a serious toll on their mental health. That's going to hurt people in the long run, and just how the stigma is. It might not be uncommon to know someone who's been affected by this, which is very sad to think about. And the government should do more, especially with the increase of shootings in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And these are my sources. And yeah, that's my presentation. I hope you got a lot from here. And this is from Final Project. And everyone, stay safe.